Good afternoon. My name is Jim Conlan, and welcome to the latest episode of our sports show. As you know, we've been previewing and airing all this month about our upcoming documentary, My Life in Rugby, Global Rugby Legends, where we speak to renowned former rugby players and some players that have just recently retired as well about their rugby career, their whole story from club rugby growing up all the way to an international career to the heights of the World Cup, and for some of the Northern Hemisphere players playing in British and Irish Lions tours as well. So we've spoken to players from Northern Hemisphere, England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, France and Italy, and in the Southern Hemisphere then South Africa, New Zealand, Australia and Argentina. My guest this evening is Wales representative. He has over 48 caps for Wales, and over 75 points over an 11-year period. He scored 15 tries for Wales, and he's also appeared 3 times for the British and Irish Lions. He's over 565 points in his club career, and he's the first person ever to score over 25 tries in the Heineken Cup, scoring 29 tries overall as well. He has played for notable clubs like Harlequins, Cardinals, Sale, mostly in wing or inside centre. He made his debut in 1996 for Australia. He competed in the 2007 World Cup, and it was 2001 the British Irish Lions in Australia. He played all 3 tests, scoring once of the 4 tries in the opening test victory, the one and only Dafydd James. Dafydd, pleasure joining us with us today in terms of looking back on the highlights and moments of your career. And I suppose you're looking back in the 1990s, early sort of 2000s, we're roughly maybe 15 years on, maybe I'm reading it just maybe 10 to 12 years, maybe since you hung up your boots. You start to look back in it now and you said, wow, that's a flash in the pan. That sort of timeline where it went, or you sort of still have happy memories. You still remember all some of those highlights being a line. Is it still very much fresh in your mind, or do you have to struggle sometimes in terms of thinking to yourself that almost felt like a past lifetime?
Yeah, it goes so quick. 16 years as pro in the end. Yeah, it's probably around 10, 11 years now, really, since I stopped playing. It was forced. It was out of my control in the end, which was a little bit sour grapes, but, you know, it is what it is. It's, you know, I had a great time and thoroughly enjoyed it. I haven't really reflected back a lot on it, if I'm totally honest. Like some players, I struggle to deal with coming to the end. And, yeah, so I've had my challenges in that regard. But, yeah, it was a blink of an eye. And I can always remember my father saying, look, enjoy every second because it'll be gone before you know it. And lo and behold, it was. Yeah.
And Dafydd, just tell you about your earlier childhood. Now, I noticed here the research says, if this is correct, that you were born in Zambia. But did you ever actually spend any time in Zambia, or was it just a scenario that your mother and father were there at the time, and it was the sort of thing where you sort of due maybe 5-6 months, and maybe as a 2-year-old or 3-year-old you were back in Wales again? Or how does that come to pass? Do you know the sort of story?
Yeah, look, I'm an expat child, really. My father was working on the copper belts in Africa, in Zambia in particular, and then we moved back to Wales for a short stint, and then we moved over to South Africa. So, you know, my early sort of childhood was in Africa, and then came back, you know, for the comprehensive school, secondary school as it was, and you know, that's where I've been ever since.
So you actually grew up in the sort of box culture in terms of rugby in Zambia, and obviously that part of Africa as well. In terms of sport, it was probably more rugby orientated than sort of football at the sort of time in terms of the sort of culture, given its sort of link. So was rugby the main sport, or rugby and cricket were the 2 main sports you played as a youngster before you actually came back to the UK?
No, it was the athletics and rugby, really. I think, you know, up on the high veld, it was pretty much, you know, summer it was either cricket or athletics. And in the winter months, it was rugby, really. You know, didn't kick a football around at all, really. So, you know, it was rugby and football, and that's what we did outside all the time. And
Dafydd, in terms of that sort of culture and being brought up in that sort of rugby sort of environment, was it very different and unique to the Northern Hemisphere rugby sort of in terms of coaching, in terms of culture as a youngster, it being training, besides, say, fellow South African boys that are maybe 10, 11, 12-year-olds sort of starting off? Was it a different sort of technique, different environment, different sort of coaching, different sort of styles? Did that really stand to you having that when you came back to the UK?
Yeah, well, they're blessed with the weather for a kickoff, so it was totally different in that regard. So, look, it was just go out and play and just enjoy it. I think it was a different mentality because the ground's a lot harder and faster. It's more conducive to running rugby, really, and that's where the athletics bit kicked in as well. So it was pretty much just throw the ball around, score some tries. Really, it was never kick a ball. It was just keep it in hand and away you go.
And I suppose you mentioned about your parents sort of moving around and that. And in terms of your father, in terms of work, were you ever sort of settled in one area for a period of time where you could sort of concentrate on your rugby, or wherever your sort of father's projects took you and you had to upskill again, meet sort of new friends, go into a new sort of rugby club, new sort of environment, and start afresh again? And was that sort of daunting and challenging as a youngster?
Yeah, it was always going to be difficult, really, because you didn't grow up with your nucleus of friends. You was always trying to find new friends, and coming back into a secondary school environment, and people have already made their friends, so to speak. So you got to start all over again. And it was good. It was a challenge. It was good opportunities, and I went. When we come back, I went to a hotbed for rugby, which has been a plethora of international players come through a Brinteg Comprehensive School. It was at Heelgamel Grammar School, which JPR Williams and several other internationals who've come through the ranks and gone through. So I went to that school, and that was just pretty much rugby dominated. And it just happened, really. I was just a young child and just went out and enjoyed it. I didn't really know what was what or where I was going with it, but yeah.
And I suppose, given your parents' sort of environment and their background, they probably preached education to you and the importance of education at a young age, in terms of rugby was probably seen as a sort of a pipe dream as such. And rugby, when you were starting off growing up a child, was very much in the amateur sort of era as well. It didn't turn professional till late 90s. So many guys sort of went to college, university, looked at it as a pastime until it sort of took up. Is that the way you started looking at what was a young David James's career and sort of a vision? Was it to be a plumber, electrician, a banker? What was the sort of aspirations for you if rugby hadn't sort of taken off and hadn't got?
Well, it wasn't professional, so it was just you're following your local side, and at the time it was Bridgend. I've grown up essentially following them throughout my secondary school, played in the district sides for Bridgend, and went through and we won the Do Issue, which is a big competition in Wales, and we won that. And then I wasn't highly academic in school. I struggled a little bit, but it wasn't until after I finished school and I went and done an apprenticeship in Sony's, and that's where I started becoming a bit more academical. I think I was sort of maturing, if you like, and then I went on to Swansea University. So, and I was fortunate enough. It was around the time when I was going to Swansea University, post Sony's, the game started to turn professional. It was amateur. We were getting the brown envelopes, if you like, boot money, whatever you want to call it. And then the game went and turned professional, 95, 96, I think it was.
And in terms of that, when the English Premier League sides, English Premiership, win professional, it's interesting to hear some of the stories now. David Humphrey's stories, how Sir Clive Woodward sort of came to Ireland and sort of scouted him out in terms of that. In terms of David Wallace told the story about going to Saracens and how that sort of came about in terms of the sort of contract. You arrived in Harlequins. What was the original story in terms of that? Did Harlequins source you out? Did someone come to you looking for you? Because at the time, the English Premier League clubs were scooping into the Scottish market, scooping into the Welsh market, scooping into the Irish market and pluck players.
Yeah, it was an opportunity that just arose. It was something that just presented itself for me, really. It was the demise of the Celtic Warriors at the time. I'm not sure if you can remember that. Then when there was 5 regions, now it's down to 4 regions in Wales, and I was involved with the Celtic Warriors, which was an amalgamation of Pontypridd and Bridgend. post my Lions tour, 2001, I think it was 2003 season, I think it was. And they disbanded. It went insolvent. And, I was one of the fortunate ones to get offered a couple of opportunities, in Wales, in France and England, and Harlequins was one of them opportunities. And I fancied a new chance, a new challenge, and I went to Harlequins.
Can you just, in terms of your sort of career, in terms of your club career, in terms of that rapid sort of growth and sort of projection, and you made your debut for Wales in 1996 against Australia, just after the Rugby World Cup in South Africa. In terms of that, was South Africa winning that Rugby World Cup in 1995? Was that a time when sort of Wales were looking to sort of re-energize their squad, doing a bit of blooding of sort of youngsters in terms of giving guys an opportunity? Or how were you on the cluster there for a while? Were you disappointed that you didn't go to the World Cup maybe in 95? Did you feel that you were in recognition for that, or did you just come on the scene basically after the World Cup?
Well, I was just after it was. I started off grassroots rugby essentially for a local team, a village team, Kempy Hill, which is, my home club really. And at the time they wouldn't let me go to a professional, I say professional club, a top tier club, a Premier club, if you like. And so I had a season there that was in 95. I was 19 years of age, playing, enjoying it, learning my trade, if you like. And the World Cup come about, and it was an opportunity that just, once again, it just fell on my lap. And Bridgend asked me to go along. I had opportunities going underneath, but Bridgend was my local team. It was a team I'd supported as a youngster coming through the secondary school and played the districts for them. And it was just one of them, and it was just a whirlwind season for me. And things were just going really well. I was scoring tries, I was enjoying and creating opportunities for other people as well. And at the end of the year, there was the trip to Australia, 96, and I was fortunate enough to get on that. And I think I played the most games, really. I was fit, I was athletic at the time, a lot younger, youthful exuberance coming through, and played. And I got selected in the last test. I was on the bench. I was going to come on a little bit earlier. Ian Emmons said he was going to come off for me. He didn't, and in the end, a chap in the centre called Nigel Davis come off, and then I come on for my cap, really, my first cap.
And you're coming on to that cap and against Australia. And lo and behold, I don't know if that pairing was in front of you, but Kefu and sort of Horan, were they the two opposing sort of centres at the time?
Yeah, it was Timmy Horan, and I think it was Little, and on the wing was Campese. And, I think I played against Campese several months later, and in one of his last tour, essentially, and he played in the old Cardiff Arms Park. So I was fortunate enough to play in that before it went to the Millennium and now Principality Stadium, yeah.
So obviously Timmy Horan facing you down in terms of your debut, probably one of the all-time greats in sort of the centre sort of position. Not an easy sort of a start in terms of Welsh jersey facing up to that. Was that sort of why you started it? Did a gleam come over your eye when you saw Horan get the ball for the first time and you're trying to say to yourself, right, I'm going to knock him back a few steps and make my mark here?
Well, when you're young, and things have gone really well. There's a bag of nerves really coming onto the field at that stage, and I didn't know how to control my emotions and different things. But no, for me it was just a dream come true. It was like something like a film sort of thing, and then all of a sudden, then you're up against these world legends as they are, and it wasn't daunting in a weird way. It was just my own nerves, really. I didn't worry about the next person, really. It was just thinking about myself.
Yeah, and obviously in terms of the backline, you probably have Howley at scrum half. You probably have Jenkins and Neil Jenkins at centre in terms of their guidance, in terms of their leadership. Obviously, it has players like that to settle you in. Obviously, it must be great as a youngster because Howley obviously barking, sort of giving the instruction of the scrum. Jenkins orchestrating everything from that fly half position in terms, so you can almost find your rhythm sort of working off those two in terms of feeding your way into the game.
Yeah, well, they were very good players, by world class players at the time, and they developed more, and it was a joy to play outside Neil Jenkins. Really, he had a wonderful pass. He was deceptively quick and an exceptionally good goal kicker. So, and what I liked about him, he controlled the forwards very well at the time. I know the game has changed slightly, physical characteristics have changed, but he liked the play of fast flowing, running style rugby, which was what suited me really.
And obviously at that time, and it's relevant to know in terms of the Five Nations when it was back then, obviously Ireland, Wales, Scotland were obviously to be battling it out between themselves as who was going to be the third place behind France and England. France and England were incredibly strong in terms of those years, especially in the mid-90s, up as far as late 2000s. And the French sort of team then obviously Intermac, Bernard Salle, Dominici, La Maison, to name, and then you have the backs like Bruce, Magne, Harnardaki, these sort of guys. And then you look at England then with Luger, with Carling, Cash, Underwood still sort of playing in terms of that. It was almost feel like that Ireland and Wales and Scotland at times. Do you feel that yourself that you're always in a competition for third place?
Yeah, well, is the Celtic rivalry. Whenever you play against England, there's always that added extra little bit of spark. It's probably the same with you guys, the Irish and the Scots. Everybody wants to beat England, really, and in Wales in particular, it's the biggest game of the year. So, yeah, look, it was difficult at the time because I think they were further developed, along the lines, if you like, before professional rugby, and they were doing things that we weren't doing, and a lot more players to choose from as well, and not making excuses. But yeah, they were very difficult outfits to play against. And in France, were just one of them majestical sort of teams that they can just carve up, and it was always chasing shadows. And it's when you get the structure right with the defensive line and impose yourself, then they seem to struggle a little bit. But it was always very difficult, and you're quite right. It was always fighting for third place, really, out of the Celtic nations.
Yeah. And David, correct me if I'm wrong. Now, I just came to my mind this sort of question. I don't know if you were playing in this game, but that famous win for Wales that Scott Gibbs tried to beat the English, it was one of those historic wins for Wales. Was that were you on the pitch in that sort of game? Was that one of the highlights?
Yeah, it was actually. Yeah, it was the last ever Five Nations game and the last ever game in Wembley, and the last game of the Five Nations as it was then, before they went to the Six Nations in '99. The Wales Stadium was getting renovated. The old Cardiff Arms Park was converted to the Millennium, now the Principality, and yeah, we were playing our home games in Wembley, and it was a fantastic occasion. It was bizarre. We were in England, playing England, supposed to be at home, and it was a moment of magic there, really. And Scott Gibbs just burst through the line out. It was meticulous, really, because it was a planned move. It was a trifecta Treviso, I believe it was, and it was straight off the top ball. It was the irony was, it was Tim Rodber who had an exceptional game that game, and he took Colin Chavis's head off, and it was like textbook. It was meant to happen, really. And Neil Jenkins stood up, kicked the ball deep into the England half, just outside the 22, I think it was, on the right-hand side. And Graham Henry, who come in the year before that, just after that humiliating defeat in South Africa in '98, and he always said, look, the element of surprise, walk together, then throw a curveball in, have a 5-man, 6-man, whatever line out. And this was a planned move. Garen Jenkins grabs the ball straight off the top. Chris Wyatt goes up in the air, straight down to Rob Howley. Scott Quinnell's dropped into the back line. He gets the ball, he draws in Neil back. Johnny Wilkinson, I think it was Dawson, was corner flagging, if you like. And it was unknown to us, really. Scott Quinnell actually had a slight little pass off his left shoulder to Scott Gibbs, who at this acute angle, and Scott Quinnell really drew all the players in, and then Gibbsy just done his magic then, stepping inside, I think it was Matt Dawson, and then Matt Perry and Victor Mbugu just clashed, and Gibbsy stepped and was going to score the try, and he put his hand up to celebrate, and we'd all just go and put it down, screaming, put it down, and the crowd just goes berserk. And then he gets up, crowd is going mental, and Neil Jenkins has to kick the kick for us to get in front by 1 point. Is still a deficit at 1 point, and I think it was 35, 34, 33 or whatever it was at the time. We were still a point behind, so Neil Jenkins had to kick the kick for us to win the game. And then we had a couple of moments left, and Gibbsy got up. We were all celebrating, jumping on him, and true to fashion with Scott Gibbs, he's a bit off the wall, and he comes back with the ball, and pardon my French here, but Neil Jenkins goes to give him a high five, Alan Gibbsy, and now Gibbsy just slams the ball into his tummy and says, oh, now kick the fucking thing. And off he went there. And lo and behold, he struck it through, and we call him the radar, and that's why, because his boot was like a radar. He just hove in and bang, over it went. And it was some beer drunk on that evening, and partying with Tom Jones and Catatonia were there, and all that sort of thing, Cerys Matthews. And I remember the Jocks. I think the Jocks won it that year. The Scots won it, and they beat England to the top. I think the Jocks won the Five Nations Championship, I think it was.
Yeah, they did, yeah.
Yeah, and they sent us all a bottle of Famous Grouse. They sent us all, the whole squad had a bottle of Famous Grouse, yeah. So that was it. Yeah.
David, your memories of coming up against Ireland, and I suppose Ireland went through a sort of rough patch in terms of that, but the world-class player that Ireland had at that time, it wasn't probably, even Driscoll was coming of age, he was young, but Keith Wood was a catalyst for Ireland in those sort of years. And if you wanted to disturb Ireland or get the better, Keith Wood was, in terms of the game plan, how do you rattle Wood coming off the Irish line? Ireland were a kicking game, they kicked to the corners, they'd have likes of Malcolm O'Kelly in the lineouts and stuff, and then Wood would come off the sort of peel, and 10 yards out from that line, he was unstoppable for most teams, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. Do you have a sort of game plan and try and curb Wood's dominance in terms of that when you ever played Ireland?
It was very difficult. We had Garen Jenkins, who was more of a scrummaging, hard edge person, and Keith Woods was an anomaly, if you like. He was so electric and elusive. He was a bundle of energy, wasn't he? Really, and Festa, as they call him, he was incredible. Like from that 10-meter distance from the try line. But he had a really big turn of pace for a big man in the front row, and it worked in his favour. He was exceptional, and he was the catalyst. And then you had the magician then who come alive, Brian O'Driscoll, who come from nowhere. But when you look back, Brendan Mullins, and had Gibson back in the day, and you've always had some good centres coming through.
And what was the sort of player that you personally admired, apart from those sort of glamour names, when you came up against Ireland? Did you sort of relish going up against him? And do you always maybe had a mutual sort of respect from him in terms of that?
Which one now, Brian?
Or? No. In terms of any other sort of player that you would have come up against Ireland.
I had a huge amount of respect for any international. I think for me, if you get to that level, you have to, it commands respect. And, I was angry individual and, trying to get the better over than someone. But, for me, you'd have to respect. It was the winger, what's his name? He played on the wing for Leinster as well. He was a great player. He was. He unfortunately didn't get on the Lions. He was opposite me.
Dennis Hickey?
Dennis Hickey. Sorry, Dennis. Yeah. Fantastic player. Played against him on a number of occasions. Funny enough, he played actually my first ever Five Nations game. I was called in the midweek because Alan Bateman, unfortunately, his daughter wasn't very well, and he dropped on. I come in on a Thursday to play on a Saturday, and I was marking Dennis Hickey, and that was his debut, I believe, and he scored. Yeah, so I won't forgive him for that one. But hey, look, with some great players over the years. Jordan Murphy was always a great player. Very elusive, deceptive, and great under the high ball. I suppose that's the Gaelic football in the Irish lads, really. They're great in the air.
And that 2007 World Cup for you in terms of what? I'm sorry, I think that's 2007 World Cup. Is that no? I just move in terms of the British or Irish lines in 2001 in terms of, were you at your peak of your powers then? Obviously, you played in all 3 tests for that sort of series. And who was your main sort of competitor or rival in terms of that sort of holding on to that sort of Lions jersey?
Yeah, well, I was ticked not to go on the trip actually, and I was on the standby for the '97 when they went to South Africa, so I got the contract in the house, and when I think it was Will Greenwood went down, I was the next man on the plane, so to speak. But I think I think there was only 2 games left, and I didn't get the nod then. So then I had the feel of it, the hunger, the desire to get there, and it just worked. It just worked out. It was 4 years. It was a process whereby, I was just building. I was learning my career, trying to develop myself, invest in my education with it, regards nutrition, strength and conditioning, speed, all these different attributes, really, which is now part of the professional game, day in, day out. And it wasn't really that far developed, as not in Wales, it wasn't at the time anyway. So, I went there. It was on the wings. It was Ben Cohen. It was Dan Lugo, which you've mentioned there. You had Ian Bolshaw. You had the magician, Jason Robinson was there. There was a lot of players up, there and knocking on the door. So you had to be on your best, and it was just a dream come true. Like I remember the first game. It was normally historically what they used to do is the first game of the tour they'll put out the strongest team or what they think is the strongest team, and we played Western Australia, I think it was, and I wasn't involved, and they put a cricket score on Western Australia. I think it was 100 odd points, I think it was, and he was like, oh geez, it's going to be hard trying to get rid of oust these guys, but you had to look at what you were playing as well. But the strength of that squad was immense when you look back, and that's not me being egotistical. You look back at some of the ones who went on to win the World Cup with England, the majority of the squad, the Richard Hill, Neil Back, Delalio, Martin Johnson, Jason Leonard, these sort of guys were there. So it was a task, and we played. I can remember it was in North Queensland country. It was Townsville, and we were playing North Queensland or whatever it was. I don't know. And it worked well. It was Jason Robinson on one wing. I think he had 4. It was Rob Henderson in the centre, myself on the other wing, and it was Matt Perry at fullback. And it turned out that we were the 3 that got the test nods in the end. Really, it just worked. It just worked, and I just grew in strength over the trip, and I was blessed to get the nod. And it was tough, but very, very much enjoyable.
David, I want to, you mentioned there an injury forced you sort to retire, but just in general sort of senses in terms of injuries down through years, we know there's so much done in terms of rugby, in terms of this current day, in terms of protocols around concussions and all that sort of stuff. But in your time playing your rugby career in the 90s, 2000s, did you ever have a bad case of concussion, or where you were knocked out playing a game or something that you, even to this day, you still can't remember what happened coming into sort of dressing room? But did concussion really advance the protocols later on in terms of the rugby career? And at that time in the 90s, was it still very much dangerous in terms of what happened on the field, in terms of that risk?
Yeah, look, it's quite obvious. A number of players did. From my point of view, I got sparked out a couple of times and carried on really. But it was what you did. It was just what happened, and you could get a knee to the head, or bottom of a ruck, and someone falls on you with a knee unintentionally. Well, you'd hope it's unintentionally, but the game was physical. It was bruising. It was literally a war of attrition, and the likelihood is you are going to bang your head at some stage in the game, or it is going to come home at some stage. So, look, it happened on a few occasions, but then you just had the magic sponge, as it was back in the day, and off you go. And in a way, it was just what you did. It's what you've seen. It's what, that's part of the game, and you get on with it. And you didn't know the impact or what was going to happen, and certainly wasn't aware of sort of the implications, what we're talking about now, of what was going on. But it was just seen as the norm.